hope I learn something. I hope I learn something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny days. I hope you learn something. I hope you learn something. I hope you learn something from the stormy seas, from the brightest days, from the darkest nights, from the sunny
And hello, welcome to part 2 of today's extravaganza here on AHNC All Hat No Cattle. I'm Hat. Why is it 12:30 instead of 12 like I had promised at the end of the Sally Moyer testimony? Because I forgot to turn my microphone on when I started talking at noon. I got a good 12 minutes into it before I realized, that I had done it again and not turned on my microphone. And since I had started without anybody in the chat, there was no one to notify me. I apologize for any of you who were listening, expecting to hear something and got dead air only. Hopefully this will at least kind of make up for it. So, as you can see, we had got to page 6 before I finally shut up. Who is this and what are we doing? This is Loretta Lynch. And Loretta Lynch, as we all know, is famous for her meeting with Bill Clinton, the husband of the star target of the mid-year exam investigation, one Hillary Clinton, on the tarmac at Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix, Arizona, about, let me see, what was it? About a week, 2 weeks before the July 5th reading of the declination memo by James Comey. Excuse me, the one that let Hillary totally off the hook for breaking crimes but being too stupid to be charged. That memo. Lynch tried to save face by recusing herself from her investigation and leaving it up to, quote, her veteran career prosecutors. But she didn't really recuse herself. We know this because when the declination letter was presented to the DOJ for a pro forma stamp of approval, Lynch is the one who gave the approval for the declination. But I thought she was supposed to leave it up to her prosecutors. She obviously didn't. But the fix wasn't in, folks. Not at all. Not at all. In fact, really, we know that the fix was in months before the letter was read by Comey in front of the press. It's obvious when the DOJ told the FBI that they had to find intent under 18 U.S.C. 793F, which only asked that you find gross negligence in the acts of the perpetrator. But for some reason, the FBI bought this and did all of their interviews and all of their searching looking for evidence of intent, thereby missing dozens of other leads for things like destruction of property, destruction of property under a court order, obstruction of justice, mishandling of documents, obviously classified documents, having skiffs in 2 private residences, setting up a private server to go around FOIA requirements and the Records Retention Act in the State Department by not using the State Department system to conduct her business, and not even backing up her correspondence to the to the State Department system in order to create a record that could be tracked through the Records Retention Act. Complete and total fraud, but they let it go. For now, anyway. We'll see. That's a brief background on Loretta Lynch. So, executive session. Committee on the Judiciary, joint with the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, U.S. House of Representatives, Washington, D.C., interview of Loretta Lynch. This happened on Wednesday, December 19th, 2018, in Washington, D.C., in room 2141 of the Rayburn office building. Started at 10:17 a.m., and the members present, a lot of heavy hitters here: Goodlatte, Isa, Jordan, Biggs. Unfortunately, we also have to deal with Nadler, Cummings, Jackson Lee. Then there's Cohen, Raskin, Demings, Krishnamurthy, and Connolly. So the ones we've got to look out for, of course, are Nadler, Cummings, and Jackson Lee. All partisan, ignoramuses. Yes, ignorant ignoramuses. I meant that twice. So, we'll start with the basics, and then we'll skip the preamble. Chairman Goodlatte will go on the record. This is a transcribed interview of Loretta Lynch. Chairman Gowdy and I requested this interview as part of a joint investigation by the House Committee on the Judiciary, got a lot of honey in my mouth, excuse me, and the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform into decisions made and not made by the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding the 2016 presidential election. Would the witness please state her name for the record? Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Loretta Lynch. Goodlatte, I want to thank you for appearing today, and we appreciate your willingness to appear voluntarily. My name is Bob Goodlatte, Chairman of the Judiciary Committee. I will now ask everyone else who is here in the room, other than Ms. Lynch's personal counsel, who we will get to in a moment, to introduce themselves for the record. Good morning, I'm Robert Parmenter from the Judiciary Committee, Majority Staff. Andy Biggs, Arizona, Republican. Jim Jordan, needs no introduction. David Lassiter, Department of Justice. Brad Weinsheimer with the Department of Justice. Arthur Baker, Counsel for the House Judiciary Committee, Majority Staff. Zach Summers, House Judiciary, Majority. Ryan Breitenbach, House Judiciary, Majority. Gerald Nadler, Ranking Member. Ms. Jackson Lee, Sheila Jackson Lee, House Judiciary Committee. I may refer to Sheila Jackson Lee as Shirley sometimes during the reading. I don't mean it as an offensive gesture. I just sometimes get Sheila and Shirley mixed up in my mind, and I apologize in advance for any offense that may be taken by that mistake. But trust me, it is an honest mistake. In fact, I'm just going to write it down right here. Sheila. Like in Australia, a Sheila. Okay, we got it. She's not Australian, is she? Wink. Okay, next, Ira H., a name I'll never pronounce because I can't. House Judiciary Minority. From now on, she's Ms. H. For those of you who are listening, it's spelled Hariharan. Too many A's, too many H's. Ms. Shen. Valerie Shen, House Oversight and Government Reform, Majority. Janet Kim, House Oversight and Government Reform, Democrats. Matt Morgan, House Judiciary Committee, Minority Staff. Will Emmons, House Judiciary Staff. Molly Cole. Suzanne Saxman-Grooms, House Oversight Committee, Democrat. Raja Krishnamurthy. Anudeep Buttaraju, House Oversight Majority. Christopher Ventura, House Judiciary Committee, Republicans. Steve Castor, Oversight and Government Reform, Majority. Megan Green, House Oversight Majority. Sean Brebbia, House Oversight Majority. Emily Green. That is the most people I have ever introduced in any of these, as you might expect, being we've got a cabinet member here. Okay. Those of you who may remember, the questions are an hour apiece. The questioning, an hour for Republicans, then it goes an hour for the Democrats, and back and forth until they're done with their questions. If this is anything like Moyer's, then the Republicans are going to have 2 question sessions. The Democrats are going to have 1 full and then 1 partial. But we'll see. So now we've got to the boilerplate. I'm going to skip all this. Okay, now we've got counsel. And you are appearing today with counsel. Could counsel please state your name for the record? Wells. My name is Ted Wells. I am at the law firm of Paul Weiss. Tarlow. Richard Tarlow, also from Paul Weiss. Lerner. Justin Lerner, also from Paul Weiss. Okay. In case you missed it, Paul and Weiss are two separate words. There's a comma between them. More boilerplate, more boilerplate. Okay, now we get into it. The time is 10:22, and we will start with the first round of questions. Mr. Summers starts. Ms. Lynch, I'd just like to start with some very basic questions, mainly about your knowledge and your role in both the mid-year exam investigation and the Crossfire Hurricane investigation after that. Turn on my monitor a little bit. There we go. So I think you know, the very basic question is, when did you learn that the FBI had an open investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server? Answer. I first learned of the issue in summer of 2015, and I believe it was the month of July. I was informed that the Department of Justice had received a referral from the State Department Inspector General that because there were issues with how classified information may have been transmitted, and the people who were involved in that were no longer with the State Department, they were referring it to the Department of Justice because they didn't have the jurisdiction to deal with former employees. It is my understanding that the State Department will be looking at their own procedures. It would be sort of a 2-step process. And as I said, my recollection is it was in July of 2015, but I can't be more specific as to when in that month. Now, this is an interesting point that I actually hadn't thought of before. Hillary was doing this stuff after she had left the Secretary of State position. So that raises a whole new ball game. Not just that she was doing it while she was a government employee, but she was trading in classified information after she was gone. Now, she still had her security clearance, so it wouldn't have been illegal for her to access these documents through proper channels, but that was certainly not the case. Yeah, I hadn't heard anybody bring that up before. Interesting. Now, you may have heard yesterday that there were 23 infractions handed out over to 15 people at the State Department in regards to the handling of Clinton emails. Clinton was not involved herself, nor was her specific domain, if I'm correct. But there were, let's see, what was it? 16 referrals of infractions, and then 7 more serious breaches of the policy, if you will. There will be referrals for disciplinary action. I did see firing mentioned as one of the options, but then again, so was referral to counseling. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, that was a pretty cool article. I suggest you look it up. Very interesting. But you know what I'll do? Let me find it real fast, and I will put it in the description. Let me see now. State Department classified fractions. Here we go. We'll go with MSN for the link. That's fairly. Oh, it gave us Fox News. Okay, I hope you all don't mind a slightly partisan. Yes, slightly partisan look on this, but we will get to it in the description. Okay. So, question. And just to be specific, when you learned about what you just described, was the investigation open, or was it like officially opened by the FBI, or were you learning it slightly before it was officially opened? You know, I wouldn't know the official opening date, as in when did the computer assign a number to it, because that's what happens when you open a case. Whether it's the FBI or a U.S. Attorney's office, there's an official, you open something in a computer. It's assigned a number, and the computer generates these names. So that date wouldn't have been brought to my attention, but I was aware of the referral, and I knew that it was certainly something that the department would be looking into. Who brought it to your attention? I don't recall specifically whether it was in my morning meeting of my staff or whether it was in the security meeting that I had with the director and deputy director. Between those two meetings, I don't recall. Now let's remember, we're talking about 3 years ago at this point in time for all of her, for actually the majority of her memory. The rest of it would be 2 years ago at that time. So, unless she referred to contemporaneous notes, which I'm sure she didn't before the testimony, she would be hard-pressed to have specific knowledge of some of these answers. And I give her that. I understand that. Okay? And what were you told specifically that the FBI was going to be... Oh, you can't. I'm sorry. You were saying? I was asking you specifically what you were told the FBI was going to be looking into. You know, I wouldn't be told in a breakdown of the FBI would be looking into one thing and somebody else would be looking into another. What I would be told at my level was that the department had received a referral from the Inspector General of the State Department that we collectively would be looking into the matter of how classified information may have been handled, whether there were any issues resulting from that. Yeah, well, no such thing as a matter. So at the level of the Attorney General, I was informed, as I mentioned, of the referral, that we'd be looking into it, and certainly I knew from that it was going to be something that would take some time and would be fairly sensitive. All right, so you were informed about the opening of the investigation, and then beyond this initial time, you're told about it. Is this something you're regularly updated on, or is it something that falls off your radar? Well, you're referring to the email investigation? Yes, the email investigation. Because it was an investigation that was going to be handled in terms of the department components through our National Security Division, I would have been briefed on it with my regular meetings with them. There were a certain category of cases, and this was included in them, that were briefed at a sensitive level. So typically, I would meet once a month with the National Security Division. We would discuss a wide range of topics, cases, investigations, policy issues, and then if we had to discuss a sensitive matter, such as this one, we would streamline that meeting because it was not something that was in the normal course of discourse because of its sensitivity. I think by streamline she means the same as the term we heard a few days ago, which was skinny down the personnel in a meeting, I'm guessing. Those meetings took place once a month. Because of my travel schedule, I would not say it was on a monthly basis evenly all the time. And certainly, if there were other issues that came up to the forefront that I needed to be briefed on, I would be briefed separately about a specific issue. Notice the length of this answer to have said, are you regularly updated, or is it something that falls off your radar? And that answer took almost 2 pages. 3/4 of a page, I should say, it did. Where it could have been much, much shorter. I think we're going to see a lot of this while she tries to run out the clock. And who is doing these briefings? At the time, John Carlin was the head of the National Security Division. He ultimately left the department. Who didn't? So that's me. Back to the text, but I think that may have been after the investigation was resolved. John would run the National Security Division briefings to myself and the Deputy Attorney General on a wide range of topics. Mary McCord was the deputy at that time. She was typically present. George Toscas was the attorney who was directly supervising the team of lawyers from NSD and then ultimately AUSAs from the Eastern District of Virginia. For specifics, often George Toscas would be the person providing specific information. For a more general summary, sometimes it would be, I can't recall if it was Mary or John, to be honest with you, who would provide summaries more often than not. Who's Mary and John? And you mentioned AUSAs from the Eastern District of Virginia. Just to be clear, they were in these briefings or were they on the team? I wasn't clear. They were on the team, but not in the briefings. Let's see. Well, John Giacalone was FBI. He could have been a part of it, most certainly. Yeah, I would say John referred to John Giacalone. Sorry, that was my phone. Let's see. They were on the team. And you mentioned AUSAs from the Eastern District of Virginia. Just to be clear, they were in these briefings or they were on the team? I wasn't clear. They were on the team, but not in the briefings. And then what about FBI? Did you hear directly from FBI during the course of the investigation? I heard from the FBI minimally during the course of the investigation. Yeah, that's because you were telling them everything to do. They didn't need to go to you for guidance. You were constantly shoving it down their throat. They wouldn't have come to. The agents wouldn't have come directly to me because I was not working directly on the case. They would report up to their supervisors. There were occasional issues that were brought to my attention, typically by the deputy director. Excuse me. At one point, I recall, he brought to my attention an issue. There had been some press reports about the size of the investigation that was inaccurate. And because I would receive those press reports also, I recalled Deputy Director McCabe correcting that for me, letting me know that that was inaccurate and they didn't know how the press report had come out. So there were types of discussions I would have with the FBI about the investigation. You mentioned Deputy Director McCabe. Did you have any conversations with Director Comey? I would see the director pretty much, question interrupts, about mid-year exam. Obviously you spoke with the director. Yes, I think that I spoke more to the deputy director, and again, it was minimally. It was about the issues such as that one I mentioned. I don't recall having a debriefing with him until the very end of the investigation when it was the whole team together. And when was that? What are you calling the very end of the investigation? In July of 2016. July, okay. Did you discuss around that time, I'm sorry, this meeting or briefing that you had, was Director Comey in that meeting or briefing? Well, this is the meeting when the entire team briefed me on their ultimate recommendation, so Director Comey was in the meeting. Okay, so the entire team, that's DOJ and that's FBI? DOJ, FBI, as well as staff from my office and the Office of the Deputy Attorney General. Okay, as well as the Deputy Attorney General. All right. So in terms of your supervision of the investigation, it was more of a, you just received updates, you don't believe you directly in any way supervised the investigation. Well, I was not the direct line supervisor. There were supervisory prosecutors. There was a supervisory prosecutor who was essentially supervising the legal work. There she goes, running out the clock. He says, no, and she interrupts. Then George Toscas was supervising the legal team. NSD were supervising it. Things were reported up to the Deputy Attorney General and ultimately to me. Didn't come close to answering the question. I guess my question is, things being reported to you, briefing versus you giving instructions back down. Were you giving any instructions back down to any of those people in the chain. No, I wasn't asked for instruction in the sense that someone came to me with a question of, what should we do with a particular investigative technique? That's something that would not rise to the level of the Attorney General. The one time that I recall giving instructions, so you did give instructions. Excuse me. The one time that I recall giving instructions was when there was a potential litigation involving the team's attempts to secure some additional laptops in the spring of 2016. They had, and I don't recall how they had learned of the laptops, but the witnesses involved had counsel who was, I think, fairly new to the case, but the counsel was a former prosecutor and was someone that I knew. The counsel, my understanding was talking about litigating the matter. The team wanted me to be aware that there was potential litigation about this, but we talked about it from a strategy point of view, and I gave them my views from working with this particular lawyer, and I gave my views on the best way to handle this situation, and I believe that the supervisors folded those in. I didn't go back and say, did you do what I said? But we talked about it in a sense of how to handle the situation, the best and most efficient way to obtain to obtain access to the evidence that we wanted. And to my understanding, they actually did obtain that evidence fairly quickly. Quickly. Sorry, I adjusted the pillow. I didn't even think about the fact that I was still on camera. That's pretty rude of me. I'm just getting punchy, folks. You'll have to excuse these faux pas. So I see Loretta didn't mention the part about telling Comey to refer to the investigation as a matter, not an investigation from now on. Maybe that's going to come up in a little bit. Question. Okay. And you just spoke about the briefing at the end of the investigation. Did that briefing occur before or after Mr. Comey's July 5th press conference where he publicly announced the FBI's findings? It was afterwards. After that. So what was discussed in this briefing? You're referring now to the final case briefing? The final case briefing. This was the briefing that I had anticipated for some time, and essentially, the lawyers who had been working on the case had prepared a memorandum outlining the relevant facts, the initial issues from the referral that we just spoke about, from the nature and the course of the investigation, the steps that were taken, the types and numbers of interviews that were done, the types and numbers of documents that were reviewed, the issues that they had generated. Essentially, the entire structure of the investigation, the issues that they looked at, the statutes that they looked at, the standards. And then they went through, essentially, all the issues they had identified. It was a very, very thorough, almost chronology of their work, and they ultimately provided me with their recommendation. And that recommendation was consistent with the July 5th press conference that Mr. Comey gave, not to, she interrupts. Well, to the extent that the FBI's recommendations had been that they had outlined their investigative steps and their recommendations that they didn't see within a panoply of people, they were not recommending charges be brought against that group. The prosecution team made the same recommendation. So ultimately, the recommendation that I received from the team was unanimous. Okay? Question. And then, so you had the briefing that occurred after the July 5th press announcement. Did you discuss the July 5th press announcement with Director Comey before it was given? No. Before the briefing, he interrupts. I'm sorry. Before he gave, she interrupts. Neither before the briefing nor his announcement. Sorry. Oh, question. Okay. Did you discuss with Director Comey his July 5th press announcement prior to Director Comey giving his July 5th press announcement? No. I wasn't aware of it until the morning of when he called you. When he called you? It had to have been when he called me. It had to have been what they meant to say. Question. So he called you before he gave it. He called me before he gave it. And I believe he called others. I was on the line for those calls. But I was not aware of it until that morning when he called and indicated he would be making a press announcement about the investigation. but it was not to the extent of letting me know that it would be his recommendation ultimately. If he didn't ask for your permission to give this press statement, and he didn't ask for your permission to give this press statement during that call? Answer: No. He indicated that he was only going to be talking about the investigation, and based upon my prior knowledge of positions he had taken, he had indicated he was not interested in participating in an ultimate recommendation announcement. Well, he changed his mind on that, didn't he? He did not want to consult with me on the specifics of what he was going to say, because I did ask, as he indicated in words or substance, I don't recall the exact words, that he thought it would be better if we had not coordinated it, but that his announcement was going to be about the investigation. I don't recall if he used the term mid-year or not, but the email investigation. You've come around to using investigation, have you? Good. Question: so ultimately, you get the recommendation, no charges, no prosecution, no charges from the FBI, no prosecution from DOJ. Obviously, you concurred in that recommendation? I asked a number of questions during the briefing, as did other people in the room. I always encourage people to raise issues and to ask questions. I asked questions of the team about the statutes it identified. It was always a concern as to whether or not any of the witnesses have been less than candid, less than truthful at any point in the investigation, or that they took obstructive steps, and we had a full discussion about that. We also discussed, again, by going around the room and having everyone's input, their views on whether or not this was a group of people that should be charged in any way. And as I indicated before, the recommendation was unanimous that the elements of the various statutes that were being discussed had not been met. It was not a case that the department would bring. Question: did you have to do anything formal at that point? I mean, obviously the DOJ and the FBI don't bring cases all the time, and the Attorney General doesn't sign off on that. Did you do anything formal in sort of solidifying the recommendation that Hillary Clinton wasn't to be charged or prosecuted? Answer: well, we had been talking about how to best announce that publicly. At that point, after we had had our team meeting and recommendation, we decided to issue a short written statement indicating that I had received and accepted the unanimous recommendation of the team that no charges would be brought. And again, that's her accepting the recommendation, not her career prosecutors. Recused my butt. And again, you mentioned, for example, that Hillary Clinton would not be charged, but it was the entire group of people who were under consideration. Q. And I did want to just keep it basic, but I did want to kind of jump to this while we're on it, because you've been calling this an investigation. Here we go. I'm sure you're familiar with some discussion of whether you ever instructed Director Comey to call the mid-year exam investigation a matter. Are you familiar with his? I think he testified to this, that you instructed him, I believe, in September of 2015, Director Comey, to call the mid-year exam investigation a matter. Answer: I heard his testimony on it, and that was the first time that he had ever indicated to me, in my understanding, he may have told others, that he had that impression of our conversation. Sort of George Toscas, Ms. Lynch. Sort of George Toscas. So you do not believe you ever instructed him to call it a matter? I did not. I have never instructed a witness as to what to say specifically. Never have, never will. Comey wasn't a witness. Comey was an investigator. That's doublespeak. In the meeting, as she continues, in the meeting that I had with the director, we were discussing how best to keep Congress informed of progress and discussed requesting resources for the department overall. We were going to testify separately. And the concern that both of us had in that meeting that I was having with him in September of 2015 was how to have that discussion without stepping across the department policy of confirming or denying an investigation, separate policy from testifying. Obviously, we wanted to testify fulsomely, and provide the information that was needed, but we were not at that point. In September of 2015, ready to confirm that there was an investigation into the email matter or deny it. We were sticking with policy, and that was my position on that. I didn't direct anyone to use specific phraseology. When the director asked me how best to handle that, I said, what I have been saying is that we have received a referral and we are working on the matter, working on the issue, or we have all the resources we need to handle the matter, handle the issue. So that was the suggestion that I made to him. Okay. So you didn't tell him to do it. You just suggested, call it an issue, call it a matter. You're the director of the DOJ. You are the Attorney General for the United States of America, the top law enforcement officer in the land under the president. You don't think that your subordinate, James Comey, wouldn't take your advice and call the investigation a matter or an issue based on your discussion of it? Give me a break, lady. Excuse me. And notice how long that answer was. Question. So you were basically surprised when you learned that he had said that you instructed him to call this a matter. I was quite surprised that he characterized it in that way. We did have a conversation about it, so I wasn't surprised that he remembered that we met about it and talked about it. But I was quite surprised that that was his characterization of it, because that was not how it was conveyed to him. Certainly not how it was intended. Okay, Jim Jordan. Excuse me, Ms. Lynch. So in the meeting with the FBI director, you referred to the Clinton investigation as a matter. I just want to make sure I understand. But you did not instruct the director when he testified in front of Congress to call it a matter. Is that accurate? I said that I had been using the phraseology, we've received a referral, because we received a public referral which we were confirming. And that is department policy, that when we receive a public referral from any agency, that we confirm the referral, but we never confirm nor deny the investigation. That's actually a standard DOJ policy. Jordan, I understand all that. Lynch, so in the meeting with the director, which was again around September, I don't recall the date, of 2015, it was very early investigation. I expressed the view that it was, in my opinion, too early for us to confirm that we had an investigation. Well, you're not supposed to confirm it at all. You're supposed to neither confirm or deny. Sorry, neither confirm nor deny. Excuse me. Lost my head. This is Lynch continuing, as always. At some point in the course of the investigations, as you all know from your oversight, it becomes such common knowledge that we talk about it using the language of investigation and things. But at that point, we had not done that, and we were not confirming or denying it. We weren't denying it at all. There was just essentially, in my view, we were following policy. And when the director asked me about my thoughts, I said yes, we had to be. We had to be completely cooperative and fulsome with Congress for both of us, and that we needed to provide as much information as we could on the issue of resources. Again, she is not answering the question. She is just going on and on, wasting time. I think we need anti-Maxine in this right now on the Republican side, just so we can hear someone screaming, I'm reclaiming my time, over and over again, so we could shut Lynch up and get her to answer the question at hand. Hey, Picasso Nose. Sorry I missed your chat for a few minutes ago. Just great to see you soon. I'm happy that I hope you had a great lunch, and I'm looking forward to having you back in the studios, as it were, the studio complex. She's my executive producer, in case some of you are new. And she's my sweetie. Okay, issue of resources. She continues. We anticipated questions about budget, what resources we had or that we needed, and that we could have that discussion in the context of handling the referral that we had received without going into the nature of the investigation or the terms of the investigation or the subjects of the investigation at that time. Jordan, thank you. Summers. Okay, so the mid-year exam investigation opens in roughly September of 2015, or I'm sorry, you said the summer of 2015. I believe it was late July, but I don't know specifically when. So Hillary gets 1 year for her investigation, not including the October surprise, if you will. But Trump gets almost 2.5 years. Cool. I mean, and ends, at least for the most part. I mean, it was reopened, I think, briefly in October, in July of 2016. Were you comfortable with the pace of the investigation? As it was reported to me, I was. It was certainly my understanding that a great deal of forensic work was being done. It was certainly my understanding that numbers of witnesses were being interviewed. And it was certainly my understanding that documents were being reviewed and that, because we were dealing with electronic data, the volume of documents was high. I certainly can't recall specifically right now what that volume was, or if I was ever given a number during the investigation. As I mentioned, in the spring of 2016, when the issue of additional electronic devices was brought to my attention, I certainly was aware that by then, that electronic devices had been reviewed, that the investigation had been moving very, very steadily. Was there any deadline on concluding the investigation? No, you can never place a deadline on concluding an investigation because you don't know what's going to develop throughout. But certainly, everyone was aware of the need to work expeditiously and essentially make sure that we gathered all the evidence that we needed to. Breitenbach. Ma'am, real quick, going back to the matter, I'm not sure I can hear you actually. He continues. Going back to the discussion of what seems to be a dichotomy, or nearly a polar opposite between what you say, that you did not call the investigation a matter, and former Director Comey saying you did. Can you explain a little bit of your understanding why this difference of opinion might exist? So you're asking for her to think for Comey. I don't think that's such a great question. Again, I'm not a lawyer though, so what do I know? Well, I'm not sure I understand your question. I have been saying in other contexts, we've received a referral, and we're handling the matter, or we're looking into the matter. So yes, I've used that term, and used it in my meeting with the director. You had said that I didn't use that term at all. Question. But in terms of the feeling that Director Comey has indicated that you called it a matter for a particular purpose, what is your testimony today that the intent behind calling it a matter? Well, as I've indicated before, there's a specific department policy that relates to public referrals that we receive, because typically we don't confirm or deny investigations or cases until there's a public filing, unless there are exceptions, like the affirmative work that we do. But if we have a public referral, we confirm the existence of the referral that comes from someone else, and we have done so in this case. We had confirmed that we had received the referral from the State Department Inspector General, but our guidance also is we do not confirm or deny an investigation flowing from that. So I talk about it at all. So I had been essentially, when asked about it at that point, and it was still very early. This is the first few weeks, maybe 8 weeks or so into the investigation. I was simply saying, if I was getting a press inquiry, we received a referral, and we are either devoting resources to the matter, or working into the matter, or we're looking into it. I was using that phraseology. Question. This rose to, this seems to have risen to such a concern for the former director that he has indicated that it was, in part, one of the reasons why he took that decision from you in announcing on July 5th the final decision. When he called you that morning, did he indicate to you that this was one of the reasons why he was going to be going public? No. And when he called me that morning, she's interrupted, This meaning the fact that he believed you had called it a matter. When he called me on the morning of July, I believe July 5th is the relevant date, right, he did not indicate to me that he was going to be making an announcement that went to the ultimate issue of how the case should be handled. He only indicated he was going to be talking about the investigation, and I took that to mean the FBI was finishing up, and he never raised with me any concerns from our meeting of September 2015. Jordan, Ms. Lynch, so in Mr. Comey's book he says this. Comey quoted you as saying, "Call it a matter." He responded, "Why would I do that?" "Just call it a matter," she snapped back. Is that accurate? Lynch, I haven't read his book, so I can't say if that's in there or not. Ah, come on. Weasel, weasel, weasel. Jordan, I'm reading directly from his book. He said, call it a matter, or you said, call it a matter. His response was, why would I do that? He said you snapped back with, just call it a matter. Is that accurate? Well, again, leaving aside whether it's in the book or not, it's not my recollection of the meeting. Okay, screw you, Loretta Lynch. You are calling Jim Jordan a liar. If Jordan had said, I'm going to stipulate that this is in his book, verbatim, would you still have given this horse hockey answer? Man. Permission to treat the witness as hostile. It's not spent S-T-E-L. That's not my recollection of the meeting, she continues, but I can't explain to you why he remembers it that way. Jordan, okay, he said this in his book. Here we go again. The Attorney General seemed to be directing me to align with the Clinton campaign strategy, he wrote, adding caustically that, quote, the FBI didn't do matters. That was, okay. Is that true? Were you trying to align him with the Clinton campaign strategy? Lynch, I wasn't aware of the Clinton campaign strategy on anything. I had never, Jordan interrupts. He's good for not letting people, just dance around. So you weren't trying to align with anybody in the Clinton campaign strategy. Lynch, I was not trying to align anyone on any issue with a campaign strategy, in this case or any other. Jordan, okay, thank you. Summers, so I think Director Comey sort of outlined 3 reasons why for his public statement. One is the matter. I think obviously there's a dispute as to whether that ever occurred, or a misunderstanding between you and Director Comey as to whether that ever occurred. I don't believe Comey all the way, and I don't believe Lynch all the way. I'd say the truth, as always, is in the middle of this. The second factor I believe that he's outlined in why he made the press statement was this is dubbed the tarmac meeting between you and former President Clinton. And I think, I'd like to discuss that a little bit. Can you take us back and, let us know why you were in Phoenix, Arizona on July 27th, 2016? Sorry, it's June 27th, 2016, excuse me. Answer, I was in the middle of a multi-city police tour. I was focusing on issues of law enforcement and community relations throughout my tenure as Attorney General. If I may interject, I keep saying that. If I may interject, you wouldn't have to work on law enforcement and community relations if your boss, the president, wasn't constantly calling the police thugs and ascribing bad intentions to their every action. Things like, if Trayvon were my son, he'd look like me. Or the New Haven, I believe it was New Haven incident with the professor getting home, trying to get into his house, and he didn't have his keys, so he's breaking in, and someone unfamiliar with him sees him breaking into the house and calls the cops. and they come to talk to him. He gets belligerent, starts screaming about who he is, how they should know him, and they wind up throwing him in the back of the car. Not throwing, certainly. They wind up putting him in the back of the car and taking him to jail and booking him on disorderly conduct. And I don't remember if there was any kind of a obstruction of justice charge or not, but it was all but ultimately dropped. Now, you may be wondering this, and I'll just say it now. The professor was black. That made all the difference to Obama. So he had the famous beer meeting, where he sat down with the officers and the professor on the South Lawn, I believe, with a picnic table, 3 chairs, and a couple pitchers of beer. And they were supposed to talk it out. Like that ever mattered on a federal level. Seriously. That's what Obama was doing to community relations with the police. That's why you had to be out there all the time. To continue. And I had started my tenure in 2015 and early 2016 with visiting 6 cities that were having very difficult relationships with police and community, and focusing on sharing guidance that the department had developed in ways to improve that, as well as connecting them with police departments around the country that were working on similar issues. You mean like the severing, if you will, of the school to prison pipeline by not referring unruly, disruptive students committing misdemeanors in school or felonies on some occasions to law enforcement so they could finish their classes and graduate with their contemporaries and not feel that stigma of having gone to jail while in school, even though a number of them absolutely deserved it. Is that one of your initiatives? Do you remember what that led to? A certain Florida thing on a sweetheart holiday. You remember that? Did you guys do that? Yep. She continues, as always, we were also trying to highlight the importance of connecting law enforcement and the community. She's already said that. In 2016, I was continuing my law enforcement tour, and this time I was focusing on jurisdictions that were working on implementing several pillars of the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. So I was visiting cities that were, in my view, and in the department's view, positive examples of community policing of, in the case of Phoenix, where I was when I saw President Clinton, of training and de-escalation tactics. In the case of Los Angeles, where I went after that, in using social media and connecting law enforcement and the community. And these were communities that had seen both crime reduction from general police tactics, but also a greatly improved relationship between law enforcement and the community. Phoenix in particular has, oh my God, I can't go on with this. I'm not reading the rest of this. Question, Phoenix was a stop on this effort? Yes. Question, and I assume, but just for the record, you didn't know President Clinton was in Phoenix at the airport? No. So tell me what happens. You're on a plane, a private plane or an FBI plane? Well, the Attorney General flies with the security detail, and so we usually use an FBI small aircraft. We flew from Washington to Phoenix in the early hours. I think we got in several hours late for some reason or another. So we got in fairly, I would say, maybe early to mid-evening, between 7 and 8 o'clock in the evening in Phoenix. It was summertime, so it's still fairly bright outside. It was still quite warm outside. People were commenting on that. Well, you're on a freaking black tarmac. Can you imagine how hot those things got? I've been on them in San Antonio and Houston in the middle of summer. We're talking 135 degrees. And in Houston's case, with full humidity. So yeah, miserable is the thing. She continues. We flew in, we were preparing to deplane. The procedure was to deplane in a series with my staff first, with security detail first, my staff, and then I would leave and go immediately to the car. We'd go to the hotel, meet, prepare for the next day, and then meet with the police department. And so how does that get communicated to you that, hey, former President Clinton wants to talk to you? I was getting ready to leave the plane. My husband was traveling with me on that occasion, so we were walking to the door of the plane. As we walked to the door, the head of my security detail came to me and said, "Ma'am, I've been informed." He didn't say by whom, but I assumed by a member of the detail that former President Clinton is also at the airfield and would like to say hello. Okay, let's look at that. She's at least 2 hours late. So now it's 7 or 8 in the evening, and Clinton just happens to be at the airport the same time she is, the same city she is. Remember, Sky Harbor is not the international airport. It's a feeder airport, or a city airport, if you will, local. Yeah, local airport is what you want to say. I could give you the class of it, but that wouldn't mean anything to you. It was not a hubbub of activity. At least for former presidents and current secretaries of states. You don't get those two people on the airport grounds at the same time very often, if at all. Question. Okay, and how long between this? He informs you, the head of your security detail informs you, President Clinton wants to meet with you, and eventually you meet with President Clinton. What kind of time lapse are we talking about here between these two events? Well, he didn't say he wanted to meet with me. It was nothing as formal as that. It was President Clinton would like to say hello to you. And it was really a few seconds. I wouldn't call it a full minute. And President Clinton, former President Clinton, was standing in the doorway of the plane. Whether he was behind my security officer when he made that statement, I couldn't say, because I couldn't see outside the plane. So I hadn't seen him walk up. Question. Okay, so he was pretty much there when she interrupts very quickly. Question, very quickly. How long did the conversation you had with President Clinton, how long was that conversation? My conversation with him was probably a little under 10 minutes. His conversation with others took a bit longer. And so when President Clinton stepped onto the plane, I said hello to him, shook his hands, introduced him to my husband. They'd never met. I had met former President Clinton maybe 2 or 3 times before in the course of my career. And then he stepped into the plane. My husband and I were standing up because we were about to leave, and President Clinton said hello to my security detail officer, shook his hand, and then stepped toward the back of the plane. There were 2 members of the flight crew there who were right behind my husband and myself, and he stepped sort of to the back of the plane and said hello to them, shook their hand, spent about 5 minutes talking with both of those 2 individuals, came back out where my husband and I were standing. I sort of reintroduced him to my husband because, again, they had never met, and he spoke with him for several minutes, asked about our trip, asked about our flight, said, I've never met, happy to meet you, haven't met you before. And at some point, I made a comment, there had been press that they had a new grandchild. I said, congratulations on your new grandchild. And we were standing up, and he turned and said, thank you very much, and started talking about that. Asked my husband if we had children. They began talking about children and kids. And I would say his conversation with me was probably a little under, maybe 8 or 9 minutes, a little under 10 minutes. His conversation overall was probably about 20 minutes. My apologies for mischaracterizing the length of that conversation earlier. Actually, that wasn't a mischaracterization. I was flat out getting it wrong. I thought it was much longer than she just described. That's my fault for not checking on that more recently. And I apologize for making it sound like it was so long. As she said in this interview, and I'm sure she has said it before, and I had just forgotten, their conversation was a little under 10 minutes, but he did stand on the plane yammering for almost twice that. So the longest conversation you'd had with him? Yes, the only real conversation I'd ever had with him. And were there any? I think you mentioned the grandkids. You discussed that. Any discussion of Department of Justice business in general, or the job of Attorney General in general? the Attorney General in general. Well, he asked what brought me to Phoenix, and I shared with him the police tour that I was on and the work that I was doing. He asked how my travels were, and I mentioned looking forward to seeing the police department, the importance of the work, so that would be department business. He also asked had I been traveling a lot. I mentioned that I had just gotten back from China, but had to cut that trip short to come back and go down to Florida because of the, I have to put this just right. There was an event involving a bad guy and a place where a lot of people like to gather and dance. And many of them did not come out of the place the way they went in. Let me leave it at that. Otherwise, YouTube will shut me down. And I mentioned to him that when I was in Alaska, I met with a number of Native American youth, and that had been a priority of Janet Reno, one of my predecessor attorneys general. And I asked if he knew about her health, that she was in fact quite ill. He said that he did know that he had visited her. And that was probably the extent, the largest part of my conversation with him. He then was responding to me about why he was in Phoenix and what he was doing and where he was off to next. If I remember correctly, he said that he was in Phoenix playing golf. I don't remember if it was supposed to be a tournament or just what. I don't think it was, because nobody plays golf in the middle of the day in Phoenix in the summer. Nobody does anything in the middle of the day in Phoenix in summer. I wish Ray Kimball were here right now. He would back me up and flesh it out even more because he lives in Phoenix. But basically, between 10 a.m. and I think 5 p.m., the city is shut down. Nobody goes anywhere. You come out in the morning, do your stuff, go home, and then you come out in the evening, do your stuff, and go home. There is no middle of the day activity in the summer in Phoenix. So Clinton's saying he was playing golf in the middle of the afternoon. A golf game usually takes anywhere from 3 to 5 hours, depending on how many people you have playing, how good they are, how slow the traffic is in front of you, things like that. It normally took me about 3 hours to play 18 holes when I was younger. If that's the case, and he was at the airport at around 7 or 8 o'clock, that means he would have had to have started playing probably around 2, in the middle of the hottest time of day in Phoenix. Does that make sense to anyone? Certainly not me. But yeah, now that I think about it, about 3 hours was average. So keep that in mind. She continues, of course. And at one point I said, well, thank you very much. It's lovely seeing you. We have to move on. And he made a comment about where he was headed to next and started talking about his next location. He finished that anecdote. I don't recall what it was about. And I again said, well, thank you very much. It's been nice seeing you. We have to move on. And he continued chatting. He continued talking. Any discussion whatsoever about Hillary Clinton. Not about mid-year exam. Just did her name come up? No. Any discussion about her campaign? No, nothing about her campaign. And I don't know if he mentioned her in the context of the kids. I just don't remember that. He may have said something about grandparents referring to both of them, but it was in a personal context. But nothing outside of that about her and nothing about the campaign at all. Question. And so you mentioned you discussed what President Clinton was doing. Was he doing anything campaign related that was part of that discussion? He didn't share that with me. He said he had been playing golf. And I commented, I found that, again, I'm not a golfer, and I don't know, but I understand people who are avid golfers who will golf in extreme heat. But it was quite warm in Phoenix, and I made a comment about that. And he talked about his golfing. Nope. God, she goes on and on. And when I said that we had to move on, he said he was moving on someplace as well. I don't recall if he was going to West Virginia, but somehow he ended up talking about West Virginia. And he had sort of an anecdote about West Virginia coal mining that was sort of a historical issue. It wasn't something that I was familiar with. And we were talking about, again, moving on, and at one point a staffer of mine came on the plane to get me. At that point, the president Mr. Clinton was then talking about Brexit. He was saying that either he had been reading an article about Brexit, and he made a reference, he quoted something that had been in the Times, the New York Times, I should say, about Brexit when my staffer was stepping on the plane. Any discussion about you staying on as Attorney General in a potential Hillary Clinton administration? No, nothing like that, he continues. Did it occur to you prior to your head of security informing you that President Clinton wanted to say hello? Did it occur to you that maybe it was improper or would have the appearance of being improper to have a conversation with him? Well, I didn't know about it before my security member mentioned it. Now let me just interject. What if there was never anything brought up, like she said, about Hillary Clinton and the mid-year exam investigation, the mid-year exam investigation in general, the Clinton campaign, Lynch staying on as Attorney General, any of that? What if none of that came up? Just the fact that Clinton got on her airplane, which is probably a small jet, a little bigger than a Learjet maybe, but not by much. So those are fairly cramped quarters. To take up that kind of personal space, because Bill Clinton's a big guy, and be in Lynch's space for all that time, could that not have been a communication to her basically saying, I know where you're at, and I'm the ex-president, so I can get to you? Could it have been a threat? Possible. We know about a certain spate of activity connected with a foundation, connected with these particular people. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it has any validity, but everybody knows about it. Some people take it more seriously than others. So what of that? Or was he just trying to insinuate himself into her life? A much less foreboding possibility. Just saying, hey Loretta, I want to be your friend. And if you're my friend, you're Hillary's friend. And so, be a friend. What of that? Possible too. Uncle Bobbity steps into the room. He says, former President Clinton, according to his recollection at the time of the tarmac meeting, had never heard of Hillary Clinton and is completely unaware of the rising body count of any co-conspirators. I had heard that. I believe he's coming out with a book that says, we didn't do it. So they're going to tour with OJ. So yes, I believe, I understand that recollection to the best of his ability would be completely above board. As always, thank you, Uncle Bobbity. So, question. Security. The head of the security comes to you and says, President Clinton wants to speak with you. Does the thought come into your mind, maybe I shouldn't have this conversation? Answer. Long answer. At the time, the thought was that, in my mind, was that it was similar to situations where other people in public life and in private life would see me and say hello, in a public or even a private setting. And people would often say, well, the Attorney General is there, I would like to say hello. And some people were in public life, and some people, as I mentioned, were private citizens. These encounters were often very brief, very short, sometimes as long as maybe 10 minutes if you got into a conversation. So I viewed it in that context, that this is someone in public life who wants to say hello. I'll say hello, and we'll move on. Then you're one of the stupidest attorney generals to have ever sat in the chair. Seriously. The husband of the target of a huge huge investigation into all kinds of wrongdoing with classified documents. And you think it's okay to take a meeting with him on a deserted piece of tarmac at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport? Seriously. Wow. And she continues, of course. As his conversation continued, I just felt that the conversation was continuing for too long. And I thought that not only did we need to move on, he didn't seem to have any particular purpose in talking to me. There was nothing specific he seemed to want to say. And after you exchange pleasantries, really people typically go on about their days, or about their evenings in this case. And so I felt that the conversation went on too long, and certainly as we were leaving, I felt that it certainly was going to raise a potential issue in the appearance of how the case was being handled. Question. So you realized that as the conversation was going on. I can't tell you when in time that I had that thought, because I was essentially, as I said before, I was speaking to him for maybe half the time he was on the plane, and thinking that any minute now we're going to say, well, good night, we're going to move on. We're going to moveon.org is what she meant to say. But certainly, as I was leaving, and thinking about the next day, and thinking about just the issues of the day, including the conversation that I had with him, I thought that it could certainly be an issue. Did you express, I'll use the word concern, did you express your concern that this might be an issue to anyone at the department? Well, I had staff traveling with me. They weren't with me on the plane. They had already deplaned. But after we all got to the hotel, I certainly conveyed concern to them. And then, question, who was that? Them. I had staff on the plane with me. I had my deputy chief of staff. I had my public affairs person. I had a staffer and counsel. And I can't recall if there was a fourth staffer with me or not. I just don't remember right now. So I had at least 3 staff members with me, and I spoke with them that evening. The next day, fairly early in the morning, I convened a call with my other chief of staff, my other deputy chief of staff in Washington, and other staffers who were still back in D.C. What about the deputy attorney general? She was on the call that I had the next morning. I didn't speak to her that evening, though. She was probably busy unmasking people and wouldn't have had time to take your call anyway. Baker. Is there any kind of office at the department, ethics, integrity, compliance, anything that would be the go-to person to get like an official ruling on whether you have to do something? Sure. Was that office or personnel in that office consulted? Well, what I can tell you is that my thinking the next day was I had to review the situation, and I wanted my staff to think it through, and I wanted the Deputy Attorney General to also consider the issue. She had her staff involved as well. And to me, it was a 2-step process to consider whether or not the fact that I had had this conversation with the former president rose to the level of having to recuse myself from the investigation. And I was discussing it with my staff on the phone, so it was a fairly large team, and I directed them as a step 1 to get an ethics opinion, to consult with the appropriate ethics offices at the department, and get a legal determination as to whether or not, as a matter of law, I should recuse myself. And I would abide by that recommendation, whatever it was. So that was step 1. As a matter of law. Didn't care about the way it looked, or as they say today, the optics, the visuals. Didn't care about any of that. Just wanted a ruling on the law. So she obviously didn't care what people thought about her and her ability to do her job in an unbiased manner. She only cared about if there was a legal precedent that would make her step down. Serious woman. Step 2. While we were working on that, someone in Washington did the consultation, and in, I think, a subsequent call, but fairly soon thereafter, received the information back that the ethics officer had been consulted, had reviewed the situation, and had provided us, reading too fast, with the opinion that there was no legal obligation to recuse. And by that I mean law, statute, regulation, that sort of thing, which I would have abided by. So then you'll have to consider as a matter of whether or not you would still voluntarily recuse. And those discussions continued after we had gotten a legal opinion. Chairman Goodlatte, General Lynch. Never heard of an attorney general called General before. Interesting. Before we go further with that, I wonder, can you tell me how President Clinton knew you on your plane were there at the airport in Phoenix? No, I can't tell you that. Did he say anything to you about that? No, but he was right there on the doorstep or close behind when his security, Lynch interrupts. Yes, Goodlatte approached. And was his plane close by? Do you know? I never saw his plane, so I can't say. Was it a private plane? I just don't know. And he was leaving as you were arriving. Is that? Lynch, leaving? You were arriving in Phoenix and leaving from the plane to go to a hotel. Lynch, yes. Goodlatte. He was staying at his plane and getting ready to leave Phoenix, or was he also staying in Phoenix? Lynch. In the course of the conversation, he did tell me that was headed elsewhere. I think they're missing the he, that he was headed elsewhere, but it was unclear to me if he was flying out that night or when exactly he was flying out that night. I didn't get that level of detail, but he did imply to me that he was headed to a different place. And you had no communication with him whatsoever before this meeting related to the fact that he was coming on board your plane? No. And did you have any communications with him after he was on board the plane? After he was... Chairman, when he left the plane, she interrupts. Oh, good lad. After he had spoken to you, did you communicate with him again later? No. Not at all? About anything? No. No, I think the next time I saw him was probably at Ms. Reno's funeral service much later in the year. Good lad. Thank you. Lynch. And we had minimal conversation then. Excuse me just a moment. I'll be right back. It'll take seconds, trust me. You thought you got rid of me, but you were wrong. Okay, back to comedy jokes. Jordan. Okay, Ms. Lynch. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that was, you can see how Goodlatte has a good legal mind. He really drilled down there. And that's the Republican strong suit. Drilling down to the base of things, getting to the bottom of the questions and answers, getting to the truth. And we all know what the Democrats do, and we'll see this in full force when they come up. Jordan, okay, Ms. Lynch. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, you land. Former President Clinton's there. Before you even deplane, he comes on board. Someone says the former president wants to talk to you. He comes on, talks to you for 8 or 9 minutes as you suggest, or as you said, excuse me. He said he talks to some other staff in 20 minutes. And when you leave, you're already thinking, wait a minute, this may not look good. Lynch, I cannot recall the specific timing of that just to be accurate. Jordan, okay, and I just want to be accurate. At some point on your way to the hotel, you're thinking, we need to check this out and make sure you just went through, make sure this is okay. Lynch, yes. Jordan, okay. So you get to the hotel and you talk with your immediate staff, the staff that's traveling with you. Is that right? Yes. The staff that was traveling with me was there. The phone call was subsequent to that. And the phone call was the next morning? Yes. And who was on that phone call? I recall the Deputy Attorney General. I recall my other, Jordan interrupts. Ms. Yates? Yes. And I recall some members of her staff being on the call. Was George Toscas on the call? I don't remember if he was on that call or a subsequent call. Excuse me. I know that I did speak with him by phone during my travels, but I'm just not able to isolate which call. Okay, but you spoke to him about this incident, the idea that you had met with former President Clinton on the tarmac. Yes. You know, another term for that is also apron, just so you know. You don't always have to call it tarmac. You can also call it the apron. It's a slightly more technical term, and it could have a more specific reference to an airport, but generally speaking, apron colloquially is the same as tarmac. The more you know. Lynch, yes. Jordan, okay. And what did Mr. Toscas and Ms. Yates, what did they say or what did they instruct you to do? Any instructions? What was their feedback? Lynch, well, as I indicated, there was a team of people on the call. In addition to Ms. Yates, George Toscas, several members of Ms. Yates' staff, my staff was also on the call. My second deputy chief of staff, other counsel were all on the call. What did Ms. Yates instruct you to do? I didn't receive instructions. It was a conversation with that team. Sorry. What was her input? What was Sally Yates' input on how you should handle it? My recollection was that she and I spoke about what had happened. I was outlining for that group what occurred and outlining what I saw the issues were. I asked others, did they see the issues? I can't recall the specifics now of who said what, though, so I'm Jordan. You ultimately stepped back and gave the decision to Mr. Comey. Did Ms. Yates instruct you to do that? Did she encourage you to do that? Lynch, I didn't hear the first part of your question, Congressman. Jordan, so you sort of stepped back and said you would allow the FBI to make this decision. Lynch, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Jordan, you seem to step back and allow the FBI, Mr. Comey, to make this decision. Did Ms. Yates encourage you to do that? I want to keep raising my voice as Jordan's trying to make himself heard over the microphone. It's hard to keep using the same level of or the same volume of my voice for each of those attempts at the question. Trust me, it was not easy. Did Ms. Yates encourage you to do that? Lynch, I didn't step back and allow the FBI to do anything. And Ms. Yates and I didn't talk about what the FBI was going to be doing or saying. So I'm not sure that's, he interrupts. Let me ask you this. Did you talk to the FBI about the fact that you had? Did you talk to the folks who were doing the investigation? Did you talk to them, Director Comey, or anyone over at the FBI about the meeting you had with Mr. Clinton? Lynch, I don't believe anyone from the FBI was on the phone in D.C. They weren't with me where I was. I was in Phoenix and Los Angeles having these calls, mostly in Phoenix. And I don't believe anyone from the FBI was on the phone in D.C., but I can't say. But I don't believe that they were on the phone. I don't believe that there were communications staff to staff. Jordan, okay, thank you. So what was it then? The FBI found out through press releases? That would be pretty rude. Summers. You mentioned seeking ethics advice, and I think you mentioned you had your staff reach out to who? I directed them to reach out to the ethics officer of the department to outline the situation and to seek guidance. And that the question that I was presenting was, I almost said ovulations. What were my obligations vis-a-vis recusal in the situation as outlined? And why did you have staff make that outreach instead of doing it directly, since you were the one in the meeting? Or not the meeting, you're the one that spoke with, she interrupts, right? He continues, President Clinton. Answer, right. My staff was in Washington with the ethics officer. They could literally walk down the hall and speak with them. Did you ever yourself speak with the ethics officer? Great question. Answer, I didn't speak with the ethics officer about this issue. I certainly have spoken with the ethics officer who was in the office at that time about a host of other issues not related to this particular matter. Was there written guidance based from the ethics officer back? I don't know if they prepared a memo or not. I didn't see one because I felt that time was of the essence. We were communicating by phone, and I just wanted to get the information as quickly as possible. But I just don't know if she wrote anything down for my chief of staff. Was that the advice that was given by the ethics? And what was the advice that was given by the ethics officer? That there was no legal or policy obligation to recuse as a matter of law or the applicable regulations. And did you recuse yourself in any way from the investigation? No, I didn't recuse myself from the investigation. Then what did you say later? I'm thinking this is coming. I think there's been, if I could just, I'd like to get your comments on, so I could just read to you. The IG in the in its investigation, did express a view about your recusal. And if I could just read that to you and get your reaction to it, and we could provide you with a copy, but I think for the record, it might be clearer if I just read it. That's weird. Anyway, he quotes, "In our view, Lynch should have either made it unambiguously clear that she did not believe that there was a basis for recusal and that she was going to remain the final decision maker, thereby making her accountable for the final decision, not Comey, or recuse herself and allow Yates to serve as acting attorney general, or sought a special counsel appointment." I remember this part. Continuing the quote, "Instead, Lynch took none of these actions, leaving it ambiguous to the public as to what her role would be. Ultimately, that left the public with the perception that the FBI director, not the Attorney General, was accountable for the declination decision." So, close quote. So, sorry, the chair. Excuse me just a moment. I really do apologize. I've got to figure this out someday. Live sound again. Woohoo! So, do you believe there was ambiguity in whether you recused yourself? Well, I did not recuse myself. And in deciding how to communicate that publicly, one of the things that I talked about with my staff was that during that particular trip, I had a scheduled appearance at the Aspen Institute at the end of that week. Aspen Institute, isn't that where Schiff met Glenn Simpson a little while ago? Last year, I think it was, or the year before. I think it was 2016, actually, that they met. Interesting. She continues, "And even though it was previously scheduled and would normally have covered probably other topics, we knew that this was going to be a topic of great concern and great public concern, so that would be a place to discuss how the case would be handled and what my role would be in that case. My press people worked, I think, with me in discussing the best way to describe that. My understanding is, and I believe from my recollection of the morning of the event, that we also released information prior to my comments at Aspen. It wasn't a formal speech. It was one of those Q&As with a reporter on stage. So I wasn't giving a formal speech. I was taking questions from him, having a conversation with this reporter. And my recollection is that prior to the event, we did provide, we meaning the department generally, I didn't do it personally, provided information to the press in some sort of short form that I would be seeking a recommendation from the team working on the investigation. We didn't call it mid-year publicly, but the mid-year investigation, and that would likely be hoping to accept that recommendation." Okay, here she goes. "And I saw reporting on that before I even went to Aspen. That's a fairly standard way that we handled it. Then, during the course of the questioning with the reporter at the Aspen Institute, he asked me not just my conversation with President Clinton and how that came about, but what it meant for the investigation." Excuse me. So I talked about my views, that I had to do something somewhat unusual, which was pull back the curtain on how decisions are made at the department. Just as we don't confirm or deny investigations, we typically don't talk about the resolution process. We don't really talk about how we come to those conclusions in any case. But in this case, I felt that we had to, and I had to talk about the fact that the case was being handled, and had been handled from the beginning, by an experienced team of career prosecutors, career agents, were with the department before me, who would be there long after me, had no political issues, and that they would be focused on a factual inquiry and a legal analysis. They were going to provide that to me. Typically what happens is, in most instances, that recommendation is accepted, and I expected that this would happen in case as well. That would happen in this case, it should say, as well. So what is your reaction to the IGs? What's your response to the IG's views on the fact that you did not just clearly say, either I'm in or I'm out? That's clearly what the IG thinks your position was. What's your reaction? I think the IG did a very searching inquiry of this and a number of issues that arose out of the work that we did in 2016, and I very much appreciated that inquiry. And I think that when I went back and looked at the transcript much later, especially after the Aspen Institute, I don't think that I was as clear as I could have been or as I should have been, and I definitely regretted that. So I understood the IG's view there, but beyond that, I don't have any characterization of it, if that's what you're asking. Breitenbach. Do you regret formally not recusing yourself? No. There was no legal obligation to recuse myself. Then what happens is the inquiry turns into whether or not you should recuse yourself. Are there other reasons that would make it appropriate? And when I analyzed those other reasons, in my view, and in the view of my staff with whom I consulted, I did not feel that a recusal was necessary. I felt that. I knew that the case had been handled by the separate independent team. I thought it was important that that be communicated publicly. I also know that my involvement was minimal. It was supervisory at the highest levels. I had not had input in any decisions that were going to lead it one way or the other. I'd be receiving the information, of course, and making the ultimate decision as to whether to accept it, but that was something I was definitely committed to doing. But I also felt that in the absence of that, of the requirement to recuse, you have to analyze why you would do that. Certainly, it could have been more comfortable to recuse, to avoid criticism. That's always good. But then you're just handing your job to someone else to do. In my view, that would not be appropriate. Okay. Who told the FBI that they had to find intent in 793F in order to charge Hillary? Is that just one of your lower level people who came up with it on their own? Was that something you had no input in whatsoever? Did you have nothing to do with making the FBI slow walk getting the computers, getting the servers from Hillary, even after they had served a search warrant? Did you not have anything to do with the fact that a compulsory process was not used in getting the culling laptops from Samuelson and I always remember one name, but not the other. The two lawyers, Page, I think it was Page, Samuelson and Page, who not only were allowed to handle those email laptops as they wanted to, but were allowed to sit as lawyers for Hillary during her interview with the FBI, even though they were also fact witnesses. You're saying you had nothing to do with any of that. I believe you. Question. So did you feel that there was any appearance of impropriety or appearance of bias that could be seen by not recused? Answer. I certainly thought that people could have a question about it. I tried to answer those questions at Aspen in a subsequent interview. As you've noted, that the IG's view was that I was not as clear as I could have been, nor should have been in that. But I certainly thought, and I think I've stated, either at Aspen or somewhere else, that people would have concerns. And so the issue is, how do you answer those concerns, and how can you answer them to a degree that you can still represent the department and lead it forward, in this particular case, in a way that will give people comfort in the integrity of the investigation. And so that's what we've moved forward towards doing. Yes, giving people comfort, is what the Department of Justice is all about. Chairman Goodlatte, do you understand that the exact opposite occurred, that the public's confidence in the decision being taken over by the FBI director and holding a news conference created a tremendous amount of controversy rather than the normal process that this would have been handled? Certainly, after the FBI director made his statement on July 5th, I saw the reaction and understood that. However, when I was considering recusal, I didn't know that the director was going to take that action, so I didn't factor that into it. I wasn't able to see that far into the future and say that this is going to be a destabilizing force in terms of people's confidence in this decision. And then again, you're one of the stupidest people to have ever sat in the chair of Attorney General. Even if you couldn't foresee that Comey would take it upon himself to do all that, how could you not have seen the blowback you were going to get from not recusing yourself from a highly sensitive investigation, not matter, because you met with the husband of the subject? Man. She talks a lot, but she's not doing herself any favors. Goodlatte, did you spend much time discussing with your own staff the fact that there is a separation between the FBI, which conducts investigations, and the Department of Justice, which conducts prosecutions, and that the decision, even if you didn't make it yourself, should have been kept within the Department of Justice? Lynch, I'm not sure I understand the timing of that. Goodlatte, before the FBI director did what he did in terms of his public announcement, normal protocol would have been if you, as the Attorney General, were not able to make the decision, for whatever reason, whether for recusal or in this case, non-recusal, but for the appearance purposes, did you consider having the Deputy Attorney General or the Associate Deputy Attorney General or someone else in the department make this decision other than what you did do, which was to say, I will rely on the decision of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which ordinarily does not make these decisions? I don't think that's a question's worded right. Lynch, well, I don't believe I said that. I said that I was going to wait for the recommendation of the team of prosecutors and agents, and I expected that it would be a recommendation that I could accept. No, I think he got it right. Yeah, he got it right. Goodlatte, that included, your contemplation was that included people within the department. Absolutely. The lead, in fact, in my view, the lead people who were going to be giving me the recommendation were the lawyers who had been working on the case for over a year. The investigators would provide me with an outline of what had been done, what they thought, invaluable information about the conduct of witnesses, for example, invaluable information about the thoroughness of forensics. But the legal analysis that answers the question of whether or not charges are appropriate, in any case, comes from the lawyers. Chairman Goodlatte, correct. And did you, when Mr. Comey contacted you, he gave you very little notice that he was going to make this public announcement. Is that correct? Yes. Goodlatte, when he told you that, did you tell him, no, that's not appropriate, because you don't make that decision? Lynch, I did not have that conversation with him, because I did not know that he was contemplating an announcement about the ultimate result of the case. That's the party line. My understanding from previous discussions with the Deputy Attorney General were that the FBI Director had indicated he did not necessarily want to be involved in the final ultimate announcement of the case. That didn't mean that he wouldn't give me a recommendation. I think that he and the Deputy AG had questions about that, as to what kind of recommendation he would give me and when. But I would say that the last information that I had, and there had been no contradiction of it, was that he didn't want to be involved in a final announcement on the ultimate resolution of the case. So when he called me, Chairman Goodlatte interrupts, he did just the opposite of that, right? Lynch, he did, and that was not conveyed to me. Goodlatte, and you were surprised by that. So he did. When he contacted you, he didn't tell you what he was going to do. He just told you he was going to do something. What did he tell you he was going to do? My recollection is that he said that he was about to have a press conference press announcement. And it was about the email investigation. And I don't recall if he mentioned it was going to be the FBI's recommendation. I just don't recall if he used that phraseology. And I just don't recall the specifics enough to say. Good lad. But even if it were, quote, the broader FBI's recommendation, that would be unusual for that to be made public, would it not? Yes. And that's why, again, I don't recall him saying that. But there are instances, she continues, sometimes if, and again, this is more from at local law enforcement level, we often do announcements where a law enforcement agency may say, we've concluded our investigation, we're turning it over to the prosecutors, and, you won't hear anything more about it until they speak. But, again, he was not specific enough so that I could tease that out. Excuse me. I'm going to turn off the camera and mic for a second while I refill my cup out of the thermos. Be right back. Okay, done and done. Let's see, you won't hear anything, her last sentence here, but again, he was not specific enough so that I could tease that out. Good lad. The actual statement that he gave, did he clear that with you? Did he share that with you? I had not seen it, nor had any of it read to me prior to that. Good lad. So when you saw him give that on television, that was new to you just as well as the rest of all of us? Yes, it was. And did he clear that with anybody else in the Department of Justice? At the time, at the morning of the actual announcement, I was not aware of him having cleared it with anyone. I learned during that morning, I don't recall the timing, that he had had a phone call with the Deputy Attorney General, but had not given her information either as to what he was going to say, and that she also was not aware that he was intending to announce what he viewed as the final result in the case. And so beyond that, since he had not gotten clearance from either myself or the Deputy Attorney General, I was not aware of him having any other discussions at the department. Good lad. Prior to his making that announcement, did you have any conversations with Director Comey where you made it clear to him that you were not recusing himself from the case? I'm sure that should say that you were not recusing yourself from the case, but you were relying on the recommendations of the investigators and the prosecutors. Lynch, I didn't have any conversations with Director Comey about how the case would be announced or resolved in that time period at all. I didn't see him, and we didn't have any conversations scheduled, so I did not have conversations with him about the logistics of any type of announcement. Good lad. Had you publicly stated your position regarding your not recusing yourself, but relying on the recommendations of the investigators and prosecutors prior to his making that announcement? Lynch, yes, he interrupts. Do you have any reason to believe that he did not know that was your intention? Lynch, I can't say what his state of mind or what he knew. I just don't have any information that would go to that. But it was publicly known in general. We don't know what he exactly knew, but yes, my statement was public. Okay. Would you say it would be in any way reasonable to assume? She interrupts. I'm sorry, I couldn't. Good lad. Would you say it would be in any way reasonable, given that position that you had taken, for him to take it upon himself to publicly announce the decision on behalf of the FBI as opposed to the Department of Justice. Lynch, I can't answer to his state of mind. I don't have a characterization as to whether it's reasonable or not. It's not something that I contemplated, and he did not give me the reasons why he was doing it. After he made that announcement, did you have a conversation with him to express your concern about what he had done? I didn't have a conversation specifically about that. The next conversation I had with him was the day after the announcement when I had the entire team assembled. We were in my conference room and we were essentially resolving the case, and we were trying to make sure that I wanted to hear from the attorneys working on the case their views. And as I discussed in a as I discussed in a response to prior questions, that process took place. And I asked the director if he had had anything to add to the recommendation that he had publicly provided, and he said that he did not. Good lad. Did you tell him that he should not have done what he did? I did not. We were in a group of people, and I did not have that conversation with him. Lynch. Good lad. I'm sorry, Jordan starts to say, Ms. Lynch. Good lad interrupts. We're done with our time, but Mr. Jordan will follow up. Jordan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, Jordan continues. So the time between the tarmac meeting and when the FBI director makes the public announcement about the mid-year exam, you had only one conversation with the director? Say that one more time. So between the tarmac meeting, which I think was on the 27th of June, and July 5th, where Mr. Comey makes the announcement about their conclusion on mid-year exam on the Clinton investigation, you had only one conversation with the director of the FBI? At that telephone conversation that I referred to on July 5th is the only one that I recall. Excuse me. Lynch. Well, he called to tell me he was going to be making a press announcement about the investigation. He didn't tell him, gotta be me, he didn't tell me he was going to make what he viewed as the ultimate announcement in the case. He didn't give me that specificity. That was the only conversation that we had. He didn't tell him. Yeah, it had to be me. Yeah. Jordan, the only conversation you had. Okay, thank you. Good lad. Thank you. Okay, they take a quick break, and then the Democrats take over. This ought to be bad. Now, the thing is, there hasn't been any insinuations by the Republicans that Lynch acted in any way biased towards Hillary Clinton, at least not outright. Their main bone of contention was her not recusing herself after the tarmac meeting. As I see it, that was the one thing they really hammered on. So, what do the Democrats do? They make it seem like she had every right to not recuse herself because the Office of Personal Responsibility, or whatever you call it at the DOJ, said it's not against the law, it's not against statute for you to stay on. So let's see what they do about that. Oh, you do know that they're going to read Trump tweets and get into that. So, it's going to be all the same, like I've said every other reading for the last week and a half. So, enjoy. Mr. Nadler. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I gather I call this to order, so I do. It is now 11:43, I'm told, and I will start off the questioning. You can't even get that right. Jeez. Madam Attorney General, since you are a former Attorney General, I would like to ask you for your reaction to some of the statements that President Trump has made about the Department of Justice. That didn't take long. On May 20th of this year, the President tweeted, quote, I hereby demand, and will do so officially tomorrow, that the Department of Justice look into whether or not the FBI, DOJ, infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes, and if any such demands or requests were made by people within the Obama administration. Well, he's not going to get anywhere with that because Do Nothing Sessions was in the seat, and we know that Sessions wouldn't go near anything that had to do with mid-year exam or Russia. Too political, he would say. Now, Madam Attorney General, do you believe the FBI or DOJ ever investigated the Trump campaign for political purposes? I know that they did not. Wow, good for you. Did President Obama or anyone in his administration ever make a demand or request that the FBI or DOJ infiltrate or surveil the Trump campaign for political purposes? Never. At least we're getting solid questions and answers this time. They're all lies, but they're solid questions and answers. And how would you have reacted if you had received a request of this nature from any presidential administration? I would have declined that and told them how inappropriate it was. Okay, I think that's misspelled. Actually, what they meant to write was, I would have said, fine, tell me when you want it done. I believe that's what they meant to type. They just got a few words wrong, or a few letters wrong. In the tweet, Nadler, in the tweet I read, President Trump appears to be directly demanding the Department of Justice launch an investigation into his political opponents. That's what you want to read it, Nads. Fine, go for it. He continues, should the Department of Justice agree to this demand, or to any demand by a president to investigate his political opponents? Lynch, well, Congressman, here we go. A request to investigate political opponents is something that actually comes to the department quite often. It must be reviewed with the greatest care and sensitivity. Investigations should never be opened for purely political reasons, whether the person is against an opponent or not. Investigations can only be opened if there is what is called predication, clear evidence of wrongdoing that has to be looked into, not a determination of liability at the beginning, but something that warrants the vast exercise of federal power. Let's see. So, tell me what you had as a predicate. Let's see, where is that exactly? As a predicate for infiltrating the Trump campaign with several Western-controlled agents in order to set people up. People including George Papadopoulos, Michael Flynn, Sam Clovis. Let's see, I thought there was one other. Oh, Carter Page. Yeah. Nothing about setting them up, making them out to be criminals when in fact they hadn't done anything to predicate investigations. Not to mention President Trump himself and the campaign. But that's a separate matter, and that doesn't really matter that much. Nadler. And if an investigation were opened without such predication, what is the risk to our system of government of having the president try to use the Department of Justice to target political opponents? Getting it backwards there, Nadler. These aren't political opponents. These are criminals that he is targeting. You're the one right now who is investigating without predication. And for you to continue on your way without seeing that shows that you need to be voted out of office tomorrow. You are a pathetic congressman. Lynch's answer. Well, the risk of anyone trying to use the department for political purposes is twofold. First, it damages the department's standing in the eyes of the country. It damages the department's credibility. When the department does, then brings serious cases, people don't know whether to have faith in them or not. People who have serious issues or concerns don't know if the department can be trusted to adjudicate them fairly and with justice and equality, whether they are the person who may be called before the bar of law, whether they were the person who, in fact, is subject to some sort of harm. People have to have faith in the department that the work is apolitical and independent, and if the highest officer in the land, the chief executive, is calling for a subversion of that, it is of grave concern, and it should be of grave concern to everyone. If. If. So it was okay when you guys did it, but when Trump calls for a legitimate investigation, it's subversion. Got it. Typical left, making the language work to their benefit instead of using it accurately. Uncle Bobbity steps in. The Obama administration was only helping out, mutual admiration society. I can see that. I can see where Obama was just saying, you know what? I really like these guys and I want to see how they're doing. Give me a day-by-day brief on what these 4 guys are up to, 5 guys, if you include President Trump, so I can see if they're well, that they're doing okay. Because if they get a little sick, then I'll send the Surgeon General over. Or if they're confused a little bit, I'll get a team of briefers over there to help them understand the political ramifications of what they're talking about. I want to help. I want to be there for them. I totally see that. Yes. Thank you for opening my eyes to that possibility, Uncle Bobbity. Nadler, thank you. Now, on June 13, 2017, which I probably should mention was my birthday, why? Who cares? Seriously. President Trump made this personal attack against you. He tweeted, quote, A.G. Lynch made law enforcement decisions for political purposes, gave Hillary Clinton a free pass and protection. Totally illegal. Close quote. Find me one thing in that tweet that's wrong, Nadler. Deep dig down into your soul, if you've got one, and find out one thing in that tweet that's wrong. Close quote. Have you ever made a law enforcement decisions for political purposes? Okay, we saw that coming. Lynch, I have never made law enforcement decisions for political purposes as Attorney General, as U.S. Attorney, or as a line assistant. And did you ever give Hillary Clinton a free pass and protection? Yes. But she answers, no. She has to say it twice to remind herself that she's telling a lie. Secretary Clinton was subjected to a full, thorough, independent investigation. Like so many people who come before the Department of Justice, and all the facts were examined, the relevant law was applied, and the conclusion was arrived at. Nadler. And finally, did you do anything illegal in your role as Attorney General? No, I did not. Nadler. Oh, this is great. That is good to know. Just a few days ago, Director Comey was sitting here for his second day of being interviewed by both committees. He, like you, has been attacked repeatedly by President Trump. I'm going to have to do dramatic reading here, folks. I'm going to have to. Okay. He, like you, has been attacked repeatedly by President Trump for his part in leading the law enforcement agency that is currently investigating the president, his campaign, and his associates. Makes it sound like it's all legal, just because he says it out loud. Mr. Comey was asked about President Trump's tweet earlier this week. Quote, remember Michael Cohen only became a rat, subquote, after the FBI did something which is absolutely unthinkable and unheard of until the witch hunt was illegally started. They broke into an attorney's office, in caps. Why didn't they break into the DNC to get the server or Crooked's office, close quote. Director Comey responded by saying comments like these undermine the rule of law. Do you agree that this is an attack on the rule of law? And why is that? Not a broad question at all. Lynch. Well, I think, sadly, we have seen a number of attacks on the rule of law, whether they are by tweet or statements by members of the current administration. It is my hope that they will back away from those attacks on the rule of law and understand that unless the executive branch supports its sister branches of government, all of government will suffer. Okay, Lynch, let me just ask. What about when the sister branches of government refuse to support the president? What then? Riddle me that, Batman. Nadler. But do you agree or disagree that the tweet that I just read about Michael Cohen becoming a rat and about the FBI's enforcement of an execution of a search warrant of Mr. Cohen's apartment or office being a break-in, do you agree that this was an attack on the rule of law? And if so, why? Well, I certainly think it was an unfortunate statement. I think it was a mischaracterization of department practice and policy. I think it was part of an ongoing series of statements by this administration that are seeking to undermine the rule of law. You sanctimonious blank. You and Nadler deserve each other. As you know, Congressman, I'm not going to dramatic read Lynch. As you know, Congressman, I was a prosecutor in Brooklyn for a number of years, and sadly, I have had occasion to investigate and prosecute attorneys, and the process of obtaining a search warrant is one that is intense. There's a great deal of procedure and a great deal of oversight from the Department of Justice therein, and those cases are handled very, very carefully. So this wasn't unprecedented. It wasn't unusual. It was simply where the investigation went. Oh, so you guys break into the former attorney of the president's offices and hotel rooms and home all the time. Good to know. Thanks for clearing that up, Lynch. Nadler. And why are attacks like these so dangerous? Lynch. Well, part of the department's work in enforcing the law is garnering trust in the work that the department does. And to the extent that people lose that trust and faith, as I certainly have had occasion to see over my career, it makes the job of everyone in law enforcement more difficult, but it also makes people less safe. People are reluctant to call on law enforcement if they have no trust or faith in them. I certainly saw this when I was dealing with the issue of police and community relations as the Attorney General and trying to build that area up. Yeah. Like I said, if your boss hadn't done such a great job of undermining law enforcement in the eyes of their communities on his own, you wouldn't have had to have gone out there and try to put out all the fires he lit. We are now, Lynch continues, of course, we are now seeing that the issue writ large, with attacks on the department and the FBI in particular, going to the larger issues of whether any citizen can and should have faith in these institutions. These institutions are independent. They have to be perceived as such. They are apolitical. Their work has to be supported because at some point or another, everyone is going to need assistance. Whether you are a witness, whether you are sadly a victim, whether you just need assistance in managing the course of life, people have to be able to rely upon the department and the FBI to help them in those matters. Whether you just need assistance in managing the course of life? So the FBI has life coaches on board. Didn't know that. Nadler, thank you. And from your experience in law enforcement, is the characterization of someone who has committed a crime or simply aware of a crime and then testified to law enforcement a characterization of such person as a rat? Is that typical of law enforcement or is that typical of mob people? Oh, nice characterization of the president as a mobster, Nadler. Never heard anyone do that before. And let's remember, when Trump uses the term rat, he's not talking about someone who just flips. He's talking about someone who makes up crimes against the person above them in order to look better to the investigators and to get a better deal. Just like Cohen did. Cohen was a rat. Lynch. Well, it is typical of people who are afraid of that testimony. Yeah. They are mob people. They are gang leaders. They are people who are seeking to denigrate witnesses so that people won't believe them. And it occurs in all types of criminal behavior. Yeah, who's going to believe a guy who lied to banks several times, who made up a taxi medallion scam, who lied to Congress, who taped his clients? He's an attorney, and he taped his clients surreptitiously and tried to release tapes on Trump to show that he was a bad guy, and instead they blew up in his face. This is the kind of person that we're supposed to believe because you bring them before a jury or before Congress? again, the stupidest person to ever sit in the chair of AG. And Nadler is right there with her, sitting in the chair of a committee ranking member, and now, God help us all, the chair of the majority in a committee. She continues. For law enforcement, we rely on witnesses. Sometimes there are people who happen to see something. Sometimes there are people who are deeply involved in the criminal activity that we are investigating. You treat those witnesses carefully. You verify and corroborate them, but they are very, very important to the process of the legal system, and nothing Cohen said could be corroborated. Nadler, thank you. At least he's saying it's better than okay all the time. It's very obsequious, but still, at least it's better than okay. Now, Director Comey also later explained that we have to, quote, stop being numb, unquote, to attacks like these, that they go to the heart of the values we all share as Americans. Do you share Director Comey's concern that we must not become numb to President Trump and his surrogates' attacks on the rule of law and the Department of Justice? Ms. Lynch, I think that every American has a responsibility to focus on the importance of the rule of law in their community, and I think that it is easy when you hear something over and over again to, in fact, tune it out and to become numb to it. And that would be unfortunate, and frankly, it could be dangerous because people could not see their liberties slipping away. This woman's talking about liberties. They could not see opportunities slipping away. So I would hope that every citizen, whatever their political persuasion or viewpoint, would remain invested in our democracy and in making it stronger. You first. Go right ahead and start. I'm listening. And take Jerry with you. Nadler, and how do you think we can work to ensure that these attacks do not become the new normal? I mean, like all your attacks on the president for being a crook and a Nazi and Stalin and a fascist and a homophobe and a xenophobe and a transphobe and a racist and a misogynist and an Islamophobe who hates brown people. Yeah, I think that covers it. You think maybe saying that over and over every day has something to do with tearing down democracy? Maybe? Lynch, I think we have to push back against them. I find that sunlight is a great disinfectant. Brother. I think that transparency is always important in how government works, particularly in how law enforcement works. Just wait till the FISA warrant comes out, sweetie. Just you wait. There is often a tension there between what we can and cannot say about law enforcement activity, but wherever possible, I think law enforcement has to remain open and transparent and responsive. But I think we have to acknowledge the anxiety of people in our population, in our populace these days. We have to acknowledge the concerns and listen to the basis for them, and then work with them to find a way to show that, yes, government, in fact, is still listening, government is still working, government is still effective, and government is still looking out for the people of this country. Well, if you're talking about the White House, then yeah, you got it. Talking about pieces of the executive branch, yeah, you got it. Talking about your house, talking about the FBI, you got another thing coming. Excuse me. Mr. Nadler, now, you have been a private citizen for nearly 2 years now, and a lot has happened since then and during this new administration. I don't know if I should characterize it anymore as a new administration. During this administration, of everything you have seen, what has happened that is of greatest concern to you? Oh my God. Oh my God. President Obama What was the greatest thrill of being president? Oh no, I'm sorry. That was Chris Matthews getting a thrill up his leg during election night. I believe the question was, what was your greatest accomplishment as president? Both have the same effect. So, let me repeat that. Of everything you have seen, what has happened that is of greatest concern to you? Lynch. Well, I think whenever you have the opportunity to lead the Department of Justice, or even to be a member of that agency, you take great pride in the work that the department does. Well, I'm sure you're very proud of what you did to the Trump campaign. I'm sure you're head over heels about it. But mostly, you take great pride in the people who run that department day in and day out, administration after administration, and so certainly for me, it has been painful to see that institution being attacked. You should say having the rot that's within it exposed. It has been painful to see that institution being denigrated, you started it, and being used and pulled into the political fray, and certainly it is my hope that our leaders will recognize the harm that this does and not just defend the department blindly or not provide appropriate oversight, but support the department in its work and make sure that it is not only responsive to people, but people understand the importance of an independent Department of Justice and independent law enforcement. Her answers are making me as mad as the testimony that Papadopoulos gave during his interview. His testimony, I should say. I keep getting that wrong. Papadopoulos, because of all the things that were illegal that were done to him to ruin his life. This time with Lynch, it's the self-serving, flag-waving, wrapping yourself in America when in fact you were, along with, what was his name, Eric Holder, the worst stewards of the Department of Justice that have ever been in that position. I mean, you didn't stay in long enough to get rung up on obstruction or whatever. You got out while the getting was good. You were just lucky that your administration was over and that they've left you alone. I mean, for crying out loud, it is my hope that our leaders will recognize the harm that this does and not just defend the department blindly. Come on, come on. You're defending the department blindly. Nadler's defending the department blindly. And notice how Nadler has never been in on any of these committees, on any of these hearings, I should say, until this one. Not one. In fact, out of all the ones that I remember my reading, I can't remember more than once or twice the Democrats having an actual committee member who's a congressman present. The Republicans didn't do it all the time either, don't get me wrong. But with the Democrats, it was almost never. It was always just committee lawyers. And if you want to compare Republican committee lawyers to Democrat committee lawyers, you can't. It's the alpha and omega, the Republicans to the Democrats. And Nadler is showing it right here. He's in charge now of the minority questioning. And look what he's doing. Rehabilitating. Like I've said every other time before. Rehabilitating, whitewashing, backfilling to make the department look better, to keep it from falling over due to its own internal rot. Just, it's so disheartening. Nadler, so your chief concern, or the chief thing that you are talking about, is the attacks on our law enforcement agencies and the Department of Justice. Lynch, that is the most painful for me to see. Nadler, and how would you characterize the attacks, or the importance of the attacks on judges and on the facts? Okay, find me attacks on the judges that were not based in fact, and find me any attacks on actual facts. And don't give me that Kellyanne Conway alternative facts crap. That was bought and paid for. I'm sorry, what I mean by that is she owned up to it. She apologized for it. It's water under the bridge. But people keep bringing it up as if it's a thing. I'm tired of it. Lynch. Well, certainly I have a great respect for the judiciary and find those attacks on judges equally disturbing. Sadly, they are not uncommon. When people feel under attack, or they feel that law enforcement might be closing in, screw you! You will often get comments attacking the system in some way, whether it is the prosecutor or the court. Or maybe they're attacking them because it's an illegal, baseless, no predicate investigation on the president's team and on the president, according to you people, over and over again, that is basically illegal. And judges in particular, she's back to Lynch, keep not just a low profile, but they don't respond publicly to those attacks. So I think in that instance, it is quite important that all of us, every citizen, those of us in institutions, other institutions of government, support the judiciary. Well, maybe if the judiciary would support the law as it's written. Trump can't even enforce border law as it is on the books because of hysterical people like the Ninth Circuit and Congress constantly trying to get in his way of doing things that are on the books, that are written law. No, can't do it. And you know why? Because he's Trump. We don't like him. He shouldn't have won. And we're going to do everything we can to delegitimize his presidency and to completely defang him. And I mean that in the utmost sense, to make him completely ineffectual. Nadler. Sorry, I just got lost for a second. And to the extent that our institutions have been under assault, how do you think we can best get them back on track? Well, I don't know that they are off track. I do think that we have to. Nadler, good point. No, you made the right point in the first question, Nadler. You just didn't know what you were doing. Subconsciously, you knew what the right question was, and it slipped out. And now you've got Lynch, your witness, covering for you. That's how pathetic you are, Nadler. So Nadler interrupts. Good point. Lynch, I think that the work, certainly, from what I have known, the work of the department and the work of law enforcement goes on, that everyday contact with the people, that everyday contact that people have in the community with people who come to law enforcement for help, people who come to the department with issues of concern, it continues. But to the larger issues of the perception of integrity and independence, people have to speak out. Not only is sunshine a great disinfectant, but the marketplace of ideas is a wonderful thing. Then why do the Democrats keep trying to shut down free speech? Can you explain that? I mean, look at what the Washington Post and the New York Times and CNN and Washington Post and HuffPo and Vox and Axios and all those people did when Steven Crowder was attacked by that little sprite from Vox. There goes my monetization. For being mean to him, for saying a number of jokes at his expense for 2 years that was dug up just in Pride for Pride Month. I almost said Pride Week. Oh, heaven forbid, Pride Month. And I don't have a problem with gay people, don't get me wrong, but a whole month? I mean, African Americans get the shortest month of the year Aren't there 30 days past September, April, May, or is it April, June? Let me look this up. There are 30 days in June. Okay, so they got the gay community. Don't mean keep saying they like that. The gay community got the second shortest month of the year, of which are a number of them. Where the hell am I going with this? Oh, yeah. So the guy from Vox attacks Steven Crowder, attacks his channel, and ultimately gets YouTube to demonetize his entire channel solely for the reason of being a some kind of a encumbrance to the community, where not even in the rules. He didn't break any rules, but they still demonetized him based on a penumbra. So, stop attacking free speech and we'll give you that back. We'll give you the marketplace of ideas. To continue, and to the extent that we find ourselves in a situation where institutions that we love are being attacked or denigrated, I think we have a responsibility to speak out and, frankly, focus on the outstanding work that is still being done in those institutions. Nadler. So I take it you would not agree with the President's repeated suggestions that we have to tighten our libel laws to crack down on some of the criticisms. It's not the criticisms, Nadler, it's the lies. There are very few criticisms, tough word, of President Trump that are not lies. There are some, and I have said them out loud as well as others. Sometimes his tweets are beyond the pale. But you know what? He has the right to free speech. He can say whatever he wants. If it hurts his presidency, it's on him. I can't do anything about it, nor am I going to try. But these are not criticisms. They're lies. Lynch. I have found, over the course of my career and my life, that the truth is the best answer to the concerns that people have. It doesn't mean concerns go away, but people need to know that they are heard, and they need to know that someone is listening to them. Dear Abby. Nadler. And finally, as a summary, what do you view as the most dangerous threats to our core democratic values and to national security? Oh my God. Oh my God. You sanctimonious sack. Lynch. To national security, Nadler, those are really two questions. To our core democratic values and to national security. Lynch. Starting with national security, I certainly think that it's incredibly important that the United States maintain the strong relationships we have crafted throughout the international world order. And we have. Our enemies are talking to us, except for Iran, and our friends are pulling their weight and doing their fair share to make the world community work more harmoniously, while still allowing the United States to do its job for its people. I'd say that's a particularly good turnout. Or turnout. Whatever. As we look at threats particularly emanating from terrorism and the like, those relationships have been incredibly helpful in preventing a great deal of harm to Americans. Our place in the world order is vital. Not to be the world's policeman all the time. Why not? We've got the strongest military and the strongest economy in the world. If no one else is going to stomp the bad guys, I guess it's up to us. Maybe those great partners that you're talking about should step up and do their part too. Our place in the world order is vital. Now, I'm sorry, I already read that. Not to be the world's policeman all the time, not to be the moral arbiter of other countries, but to be a source of inspiration to them, to work with other agencies and train them to share information. What's wrong with being the moral arbiter? We're setting a standard to the world. This is what you can become. This is what can happen to you in just, I mean, we've only been a country for 2.5 centuries, basically. And what is your problem? Is America so far gone from your boss's work that we can no longer hold our head up high in the world community? Because he certainly tried. Barack Obama, 2008 to 2016, the apology tour. Give me a break. I'm never going to get through this. This woman's driving me crazy. So I think in terms of national security, what concerns me is when I see a retrenchment of the position that the United States has an important role to play in national security on an international level. That issue is too important to be politicized. It is too vital to the lives, literally, of every American for us to step away from our obligations on the world stage. I thought you said we weren't supposed to be the world's policemen all the time. You just completely disassociated from your first argument. I think she's insane. I think she belongs in an insane asylum. It's the standard they have for Trump. So those are my concerns as it relates to national security. And the other issue, core democratic values. Who the hell is this woman to speak on core democratic values? Seriously, Nadler, you are a woeful human being. I got that from my pathetic synonym list right there. Woeful. I remembered one. Lynch. Our core democratic values are something that I think, we go through periods in this country where, excuse me, she's got me so upset I have agita. We go through periods in this country where we don't live up to our ideals, and I know many people in this room have fought against that, have done great work in the civil rights movement, for example, opening up equality to all Americans. Who is taking the civil rights movement backwards? Identity politics, left-wing identitarians, that's who. Opening up equality to all Americans, she continues. So we know that there are going to be times when we are not at our best. Get off of that. God. Okay, it says I'm still streaming. Let me bring up. Did she close? Oh, come on.